When you play the Game of Thrones, you
subscribe and like,
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Goblin Jr. channel. Today's video, we're going to be covering part 7 of our Robert's Rebellion videos. And again, this one is going to be taking part in another part of the rebellion or another phase. So while we were talking about a lot of the Robert and Jon Arryn stuff, whether that was the taking of Goldtown, and then later the stuff in the Stormlands for Robert to reunite that entire land, because again, during this time period, we had a lot of division. It's very similar to the Blackfire rebellions where you had house fighting house. And so at this point, it was a lot of houses choosing which side they were going to be on. And we'd already seen instances already in the Stormlands and the Vale of loyalties being all over the place. Do you support your king? Do you support your house? And that's really what defined that last video. But also another part of that video that we really heavily wanted to focus on is the idea of the Targaryens and their mismanagement of the situation, right? When we talk about the opening of Robert's Rebellion, it was probably like 85%, 90% in favor of the Targaryens winning and like a 15 to 10%, because you had to think of what was going on, right? At this point, the only thing happening at the beginning of the last video was that the Vale itself was standing against the crown. And not even all of the Vale. If the Targaryens had taken the situation seriously, this could have all gone very differently. And so as we progress through these videos, the longer this war goes on, the less and less likely, or the evening of the playing fields begin in terms of the Targaryen dynasty. And by the end of it, when we get to really the Battle of the Trident, to me is the end of it, but it gets more like 55% for Robert and about 45% for Aerys. So we're going to talk about another element of what was going on during this time and stuff going on in the other part of the world outside of Robert and Jon Arryn at this time. So let's think about what was happening with Ned Stark. But before we do, if you guys like learning about this type of content or want to learn more about A Song of Ice and Fire, consider subscribing. I upload on this channel quite a lot. So if you enjoy it, consider subscribing and liking. But let's get into Ned Stark's journey. So we're going to have to go back a little bit because, again, like we talked about in the last video, we had the Battle of Goldtown, and then we also had Robert's stuff in the Stormlands. Ned is not part of that. At this, he's made the Lord of Winterfell, right? A position that he never thought he would have. That's a very big part of the first book. Again, Brandon was the one being groomed for rule. And so we look at this point, and he has to go get the banners, right? He has to do that, has to reunite the North, bring them south. He has a very difficult task, because how is he supposed to get to the North? That's a huge part of this. Because Goldtown, the major naval force or transportation in the Vale, is right now loyal to the crown, Ned has no real easy transportation to the North. So he has to choose a quite risky area. Ned was faced with crossing the Mountains of the Moon to the Fingers. And again, this is a very difficult task, because not only is Ned trying to more or less keep his identity a secret, but he also is trying to not die. We see how, again, getting through the Vale is quite a difficult task. Think about Catelyn and Tyrion early on in book 1. It's a very difficult prospect. And so you have to think about that when you go into Ned getting to the North and all the troubles and how lucky he was to even get to the Fingers at all. And so at this point, he hires a fisherman to bring him to White Harbor with a boat. And again, very similar. Again, we see a lot of history kind of repeat itself here, but just like Davos had in the normal story, he ends up washing up at Sisterton instead. We also see at this point a rumor that starts to spread about Ned. Because of the storm that they are caught up on the Bight, he actually loses their captain. And so eventually it ends up happening that the daughter of this captain ends up being the one to bring Ned to the Three Sisters. And so this is interesting because we have this rumor that basically pipes up that Ned had been sleeping with this daughter of the fisherman. And so this is said to be Jon's mother. Now, and this could be the case. It doesn't seem likely, but it could be the case. Could it be tied to something else? Order of the Green Hand believes that this character could have been someone like a Shara Dane that was coming with Ned all the way up to the North. Again, it's possible. Not a ton of evidence to really suggest that that was the case, but it is a theory that could be possible to think about when looking at Robert's rebellion. But at this point, he arrives in Sisterton. Now, this is also a very big parallel to the main story with Davos, because what do you do if you're Sisterton at this point? Right? What do you do? Because you're faced with the same idea that Stannis was faced with, or a lot of these lords would have been faced with. Do you stay loyal to the king? Do you stay loyal to your liege lord? What do you do? And so at this point, House Burrell's maester had urged Lord Burrell to deliver Ned's head to King Aerys II Targaryen. And so now, again, you're faced with this idea of, okay, this is going to decide whose side you are on. If you kill Ned here, you are public enemy number one when it comes to the rebellion at this time. But if you don't do so, and you are found out that you didn't do so, you're a public enemy number one of the Targaryens. So Lord Burrell is put into a really tough situation. What does he do with Ned? I think he makes a very important decision that is actually quite right. He does nothing, really. He lets Ned go and tells Ned, again, he knows the character Ned would be, a very honorable type, can keep secrets. That's something that is a little bit foreshadowed in this event to come, but he ends up letting Ned go and let him leave for White Harbor. But something else I think that is going to basically figure out what his decision is here is at the same time he gets news that Jon Arryn and Robert Baratheon had taken Goldtown. So this is important because it allows Robert a way of getting to the Stormlands, like we talked about in the last video, but it also now unites one kingdom against Aerys. And also, again, Lord Burrell has to understand that if he lets Ned go, the North now will also be rallied against the Targaryens. And if Robert is successful in the Stormlands, you now have 3 kingdoms against the Targaryens, and a 4th on the way with the Tullys. I think Lord Burrell is smart to understand that the playing field was evening out a bit. Because let's say in this scenario that Ned is killed. That kind of pulls now that Benjen is going to have the North coming south regardless. So killing Ned in a lot of ways is not exactly a good move for Lord Burrell anyway, right? Because you still see those factions would be probably still uniting. That's a pretty cool what if, though. If Ned had died, what would have actually happened? Again, I don't think a whole lot would have changed in terms of like who won the war, but I think after would have been a really big, interesting conversation. But at this time, we see Ned makes it to White Harbor. Now, we're not given a lot of information at this point, right? I looked on the wiki, I looked in the World of Ice and Fire, the book. I just have not really found much information to cement where Ned went to actually call his banners. Order of the Green Hand thinks that it was White Harbor, that he called everyone to him in White Harbor, and there's some other stuff that I'll talk about here, that because it is a rumor, they believed that Ned and Ashara actually married here, and this is where they probably could have had Jon as well, or at least this is when they actually had sex to have Jon. So that's all possible. Again, there's just not much evidence to back it up at this point. It is a theory, so I thought I would mention it. But at this point, you have to believe he probably either stays in White Harbor or he goes to Winterfell. I won't really like battle that because I don't think it's that important. But at this time, we know that Ned mobilizes the North, and this is going to take quite a bit of time. Think about Robb in the normal story, right? Like Robb and Ned are kind of put into a very similar situation because they have to rally the North, but they also have to do it in a very quick time. If they take too long, Robert and Jon Arryn's cause could be doomed. So I would tend to believe that Ned got as much as his force as he could and then marches south in a amount of time that makes sense for Ned. So I actually do think it could make sense for him to just stay in White Harbor, given that it would make sense for all of his forces to come south instead of going north to Winterfell and then coming back down south. It would just save time to stay at White Harbor. I think that makes a lot of sense, actually. So we basically are going to see all of these different houses come together. Notably, Roose Bolton is in a position of power. We know that. So again, all these forces are going to be coming south, right? Marching south. Howland Reed is going to be another character that's going to be part of this situation, as he'll be a little bit more important later on. And so this is what it kind of culminates with the North, right? The North has to be thinking, right? The last time that the North had fully gone to war with in going to the South, it had been quite a while at this point. And so you have all of these different factions coming north or coming south. I would think this was a given, right? The Starks are very well loved in the North. And when you have your liege lords killed, his heirs killed, his next heir, and Ned, is also under the threat of being killed, that's going to be way too far for the North, right? Think about the North's reaction to the Red Wedding, and now apply that to Aerys and the crimes that he's done against House Stark and the North as a whole, right? Remember, there were a lot of people with Brandon Stark that were Northern men, right? There were a lot of men that would have been with Rickard Stark that were Northern men. This is something the North would not have forgotten. A lot of their family members could have been killed in the crossfire. And so I think the North would have easily rallied behind Ned. There wouldn't have been a lot of questioning. I think the only question you would have had would have been kind of the same things that Robb was dealing with, people questioning his loyalty, and Ned would have had to prove that he was the man to lead them. And again, I think that would have all gone off pretty well. I think Ned was in the position to really command all these people. And so Ned is going to come south. Again, we know that they're going to end up meeting up at River Run. But that's kind of where we have to stop this video, because we're going to have more to do with Robert to get to this point where we all have our forming up and equalizing out of the Targaryens and the Baratheon force. But one more thing I want to talk about before we end out this video. What were the Targaryens doing at this time still? Right? Like, the North is mobilizing. The Vale is mobilizing. The Stormlands are mobilizing. Right now, they're their own little pockets, right? Like, the North right now is the one that you cannot deal with the most because they're the farthest up north. To even march an army there, you would basically probably run into the Stormlands behind you, the Vale attacking you from the side, and then also the North. Doesn't make any sense to deal with the North this time. But the Targaryens still are not taking this threat seriously, even after all of these forces are mobilizing to getting to a meeting spot. Again, we see this all the time. When it comes to any type of civil wars, having a central point of meeting is imperative for your forces to all gather up. And so at this time, the Targaryens are doing nothing. They're still sitting on their hands. Aerys has all this money, not spending it on sellswords or provisions or things to unite them, bribing other lords to their side. None of that is going on. Rhaegar is still off at the Tower of Joy. He's not even a part of the war yet at this time. What is Lyanna thinking? Right? She's seeing the North is mobilizing, or maybe they haven't heard of it yet. Maybe news hasn't gotten there yet, right? Because, you know, traveling to the Tower of Joy, news might be a little slow. And maybe that's an excuse you can give to Rhaegar as well. But again, we talked about this in past videos. They had to know this was going to happen, right? Like, you just can't disappear like this. And so again, it's just another video. That's really what all 7 of these videos are about, is showing the Targaryen incompetence. The Targaryens had every ability to stop this war from getting out of hand, and then chose not to. Right? If you think about the first Blackfire Rebellion, a lot of what applied there applies here, except the Targaryens didn't fix their own problems, whereas Daeron realized his hand was doing a horrible job, probably a Blackfire sympathizer, and replaced him, and things actually started to get better, and they had good military leadership with Baelor, Breakspear, Maekar, and so they were able to just, you know, get to win against the Blackfires. It was a close thing, but they were able to overcome. Here, that's not the case. Aerys does nothing. He sees all this happening and does nothing. It's not until the very last second, until Robert and his coalition is at their most powerful, that Aerys does anything. That is the biggest thing to take away from this series. And we're going to talk about it some more in the next video, as the next video will probably get through the rest of Robert's campaign, the Battle of the Bells, all of that stuff, and then get to as well as getting to our double marriage, and then setting up the Battle of the Trident, and that'll probably be 2 videos from now. But thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.